But it was not enough, as Tommy Fury stands on a love island of his own. Winner by split decision. And for matters of the sweet science, we always defer judgment to the kings of swing, hosts of the award-winning Morning Kombat podcast, Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell. Gentlemen, let's begin there at the end. 75, 74, 76, 73. Copy and paste it again. Split decision goes the way of Fury. Luke, did you see it the same?
Yeah, I will tell you that I think those are mostly fine scorecards. Certainly the two for Tommy Fury I thought were fine. 75-74 for Paul feels a little generous, if I can be real with you. I mean, there's 8 rounds in the fight. How many can Tommy Fury realistically claim to have won the full round? By the way, there were 2 weird point deductions in either direction from the referee, which were totally weird. But okay, how many rounds would you say Tommy Fury won? You can make the case for 6. It's really not that hard to do. Now, of course, you can make the case, I think, for Paul, at most, you could find 3. And then with the knockdown, maybe it could have been a draw. I don't agree that he won. Listen, cards on the table, pre-fight, Brian and I came on HQ, and we all thought that Jake Paul was going to win. This is easily, to be clear, this is easily the very best win of Tommy Fury's career by a landslide, even though it's a split decision, and one of the judges actually gave it to his opponent. It's a big leveling up moment for him.
All right, so no problem with the numbers for our guy, Luke Thomas. Brian Campbell, let's get you in the mix here. How did you score this fight?
I actually had it for Jake Paul by 1 point, which if you check my social media mentions due to the fact that Fury ended up doubling the output of Jake Paul, you can see maybe some controversy there. But look, it was a spirited effort by the 2 fighters. I thought there were close rounds in which the power punching of Jake Paul was able to see him rally back at times. But in the end, look, this was Tommy Fury's night. Sometimes it comes down to a math problem and a 10-9 scoring, and sometimes it can feel like the other man did more. Tommy Fury was the more impressive fighter visually, but you have to give credit for Jake Paul for scoring that knockdown in the final round. And if you had it close like I did, it was able to sway in his direction. Either way, it did feel like the better man on the night won. The CompuBox numbers support that for Tommy Fury, and this was a very large leap for a fighter through 8 pro fights, who, to be fair, didn't look like he had the potential of being a great pro. Still got a long way to go. This was an evolution, though, in his maturity and his ability to stand in there, getting up off the canvas to get the job done.
And that's the real question here, the one that's sort of the overarching umbrella to this entire promotion was, are these actual fighters who have actual fighting output? I mean, a win here would have set up, at least technically, Jake Paul for in the rankings to be top 15, which qualifies him for a chance at a belt. So a lot of weirdness around this fight, but the question is, have these fighters grown to a place where we can treat them, where that veneer of, let's say, amateurism has been pulled off of this type of promotion, Luke?
I would say, yeah, sure. I actually had that for Jake Paul heading into I'll say coming out of the Anderson Silva fight. Okay. I thought he had done really well. If you go back and look at on Morning Kombat, I did a tape study between the first and second Woodley fights to sort of, set the table for what was going to happen with Anderson Silva, and he vastly exceeded my expectations. I mean, think about it in terms of like jiu-jitsu belts, right? There are 5 belts in jiu-jitsu. There's white, blue, purple, brown, and black, right? And even when you get to black, there's like black belt world champion, then like the black belt at your local gym or whatever, right? We're not saying that they're black belt world champions. They're not even really black belts in boxing, but are they reaching some kind of commendable level of skill that shows development and distance from that beginning, to your point, amateurish origin that they both have? Yeah, I think to some extent that they do. At the same time, let's be real. The WBC was going to rank the winner of this, now Tommy Fury, inside the top 40. That is a disgrace, not merely because it's a weird kind of conflict of interest, but more to the point that the winner here isn't deserving of being called someone in the top 40 of this weight class. It just isn't really in the card. So I respect their development, but they're not like pro level good, and they're not all that close.
Yeah, look, this was a competitive fight. I enjoyed it. It was entertaining. It wasn't, though, at a complete high level across the board. I think the difference in this case is we're talking about celebrities. When we're talking about Jake Paul, it's certainly Fury with that last name and the brother, where you can get thrown into bigger fights early. Are other fighters with amateur backgrounds that are this point, 6-0, 8-0, as these fighters were coming in, they may be better technically. They're just not typically on television for the most part. You got to give both Fury and Paul a lot of credit as they continue to grow. But the idea that they're 4 or 5 fights away from a legitimate title or anything in that direction, it's still going to take a lot of time. We're still in the what's left of this crossover bubble in boxing where celebrities, retired fighters have come back, actors, influencers, all that. These two might be the two best in the group at that moment. Let's not forget that Tommy Fury has a reality TV background to him. But I'm not ready to crown them contenders on their way to the title. That sounds a little bit disrespectful based on, again, the spirited effort of both. But it takes time. Neither of these two had a decorated amateur career. Paul had one fight. Fury had a handful himself. They don't have that same background of fundamentals. They're overachieving and working hard. But again, it takes time.
So maybe we stand still with 1 foot on each side of legitimacy, let's say. Paul does have the rematch clause here following the loss. He did say post-fight that he plans to execute that. So we are likely to see these two again in some time. It did take 3 or so years to get them in the ring for the first time. Hopefully that is not the case here for the rematch. In terms of that rematch, maybe a little of the Jake Paul novelty is gone, Luke, but as we sell a promotion and as we build these two fighters against one another, when we actually have to look at them as two fighters in this weight class, is this a fight you want to see a second time?
Well, that's a very loaded question. Is it a fight I want to see? Well, depends what you mean by want.
Is this a fight we
say.
should see a second time?
Listen, the job of the promoter is to put on the fights that people want to pay money to see. Right, that's his job. It's not to put on ranked fighters. It's not to put on number 1 versus number 2. That can happen. That should happen. It's a great thing when it does. That's not their job. Their job is to put on fights that people want to pay money to see. In that sense, I think you will see it again. Also, and this was going to be my answer anyway, whether I want to see it or whether you want to see it is kind of irrelevant. The question is whether there's enough of a market demand to do it again. The answer is yes. And more to that point, it was competitive. I mean, yes, we're saying that Tommy was better for the majority of the rounds. At least most people are. 2 of the judges are. I think that's generally the correct sentiment. But we saw it. Jake Paul knocked him down. I think he had a couple of rounds where he was clearly bossing him around. The jab was sticking. And also, if you look at the development between the first and second Woodley fights for Jake Paul, it was a quantum leap. And so you wonder, wow, the guy who was kind of having a decent sort of maybe 7th and 8th round, certainly with the dropping there, maybe he can build on that with additional changes, additional adjustments, and really come out shining in the rematch. The fact that I'm asking these questions are going to be the centerpiece of any kind of rematch promotional angle anyway, so they're going to do it. It's probably going to sound like that for those reasons.
Yeah, this was never a fight really for hardcore boxing fans, even with the dressed up idea of Jake silencing his critics. But you do have here a rivalry, and that's something when you're having crossover names get into the boxing space. Look, you need close competitive fights, which this one had an excitement and some drama to it. You can do that a second time. There's a huge audience in the UK for boxing. As we know, Tommy Fury's brother has regularly sold out giant soccer stadiums. This is not on that level, but you've got a rivalry, you've got a storyline. Just take a look on Twitter and see the level of celebrity that were interested and engaged in this fight. You'll see it a second time. It's just not going to answer anything in terms of contendership or titles. It's a grudge match between two guys who seem to put on a good show. They seem to be good dance partners with one another. Yeah, let's do it a second time.
Yeah, I think that will garner plenty of eyes to justify. And I will note here that Paul was humble in defeat, which I'm not sure that was something we were ready to say at the beginning of the day. Luke Thomas, Brian Campbell, great stuff as always. And that great stuff continues on the premier pod in all of combat sports. They add context to the conflict each and every day on the Morning Kombat podcast. Luke Thomas, Brian Campbell, breaking all things swing down one day at a time. Download, subscribe, and enjoy the Morning Kombat.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.